So let's walk through. You were in corporate doing real estate, and then how'd you branch out and decide to get into more of the online space?
Well, before I was in corporate, my dream was to be a writer. I have always loved storytelling and writing, and I'm an Enneagram 7 for those of you out there that love Enneagram, but that means which is the visionary. But in my healthy, when I'm in health, I go into what's called the 5K. It's the investigator. So I love to like understand something and research it, and then create something around a need or a problem. So I worked at it as an editor at a daily paper for a couple of years as a writer, and did some really cool things and won some journalistic awards and did some in-depth pieces that changed policy. And then I realized that to pursue that career I was going to need a bartending job to support my journalism habit. So I ended up having an opportunity, and that's what has usually happened, is just an opportunity arose. And I've been very fortunate in my life to have the discernment to typically follow the good opportunities. And I've learned some lessons. Some I don't call it the good and the bad. I call it the good and the growth, which is when like things are challenging. But I got into real estate working for, you're in Arizona, so working for major developers, Pulte, Del Webb, Taylor Morrison, which I'm sure you've seen all their signs. When I was 23, and by the way, this was 2003 in Las Vegas. So, anyone old enough to remember what happened in 2008? I worked my butt off. I made more than $1 million in my first couple of years, was the top salesperson in the nation, and then watched everything crumble. And it was like monopoly money. And I am just very grateful. I realized at 28 in my profession that I could make a lot of money and I could also lose a lot of money. And the only thing I took with me was the experience I mean, really is the lived experience. Unfortunately, all my assets were disappeared in that recession.
Oh man. And then after that in Vegas, doing, going through that real estate, and then what happened after that?
What that did is I would love to say like I jumped into entrepreneurship. I did not even understand entrepreneurship at the time. My parents actually are both entrepreneurs, and I wanted nothing to do with it because my dad's a fisherman, my stepdad's a water well driller. So they're entrepreneurs, business owners that their livelihood and their stability is controlled by seasons and regulation. And I was like, that is not for me, not at all. And then I shortly after kind of losing everything in the recession and going through just a lot of challenges in every area, personally, professionally, in my health. Um, it was 2009, 2010. I was dating a wonderful young man, and a few months into dating, he got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. The next year, watching him fight that battle that he ended up losing, it was even a bigger lesson than obviously than losing like all of my physical assets, because what I really saw is you take nothing with you except your experience, your relationships. And I vowed to myself, I was like, something's got to change. Because that same year, I remember going to the ER thinking I was having a heart attack. It was an anxiety attack, but it was related, yes, to my personal life, but also I was under massive pressure professionally. And I wasn't in a position then, or at least I didn't think I was, to dig myself out because I didn't understand this tool called entrepreneurship. And I was like, well, another job is going to be just as hard. And it's just, at least this is a known entity, right? I know what I'm getting into. I don't want to get into something else that could possibly be worse. So my gateway drug into entrepreneurship, like many people's 14 years ago, was an accidental venture into network marketing.
Yep. I was
I
gonna
literally,
say.
I mean, I feel like that's so many stories, right?
Yeah, Rich Dad Poor Dad and MLM, I feel like is like the go-to gateway drugs into
Yes.
entrepreneurship.
So ironically, I was, all the stress, the working crazy hours, 80 hours a week, all nighters. Like it did two things. I put on 10 to 15 pounds I didn't want, and I was stressed. And so I was looking for some, I was like, what can I do to lose weight and feel good? And I found some health products, didn't understand network marketing. A couple months later, had an amazing transformation. And again, this is something I think most entrepreneurs is we tend to be the types of people that want to share what's working. And when people ask us, we're like, let me give you whatever you need, right? Especially if you're in the coaching space. And I shared it, made some money, had no idea how it worked. And then I was like, wait a second, I made a couple $1,000s from sharing something. Like, okay. And what that did, that wasn't my be all end all, but what it did is it helped me think differently. It helped me realize that I had built relationship equity for years, and also that I could leverage the same skills that I learned in, a decade plus of selling and managing more than $1 billion of real estate. And I could leverage that to other things as long as I believed in them and I believed in those products. And I did that for a couple of years. And what I found is I was ultimately utilizing my background in sales and marketing and and team building and growth to work within my network marketing business. So I was in the top 2% of earners pretty fast there. But what I didn't love about it is I love creating. I'm an entrepreneur, right? Like I don't want someone telling me what I can and can't do. I left corporate for that. And so while I'm so grateful for that because it was training grounds with very little skin in the game, um, it what I ultimately realized is like I really want to create my own thing. Like I want to be the designer. And actually in my corporate job, I got to be. I was the one that got to go out and find, not always find land, but I got to help develop products and sales plans and buyer personas and all these things that felt really creative, even though 90% of the job was killing me. The 10% was really fun. And so I launched my coaching business back in probably 2015. And like many coaches, and I wish I would have had me as a mentor then, I did just okay the first few years. And when my son was born in 2016, I was like, okay, now every hour that, I mean, I was a full time mom, full time business owner, and full time lunatic for the first year. I mean,
I
literally,
love the
that is
description.
that's the first time I've ever said that. I was like, definition of insanity, do not try to do both
Oh my
because something
goodness.
will give up. But what I realized is I have X amount of time with my child and I want to spend it. And yes, you can like work in the pockets, but that's a little hard if you're scheduling client calls. And what I decided is I'm like, if I'm paying for someone to take care of him and not just that to be away from him, I want to make sure that it's the highest use of my time. And I didn't feel like things were moving quickly enough. I wasn't totally working with clients in my zone of genius. I could not say at that time that I loved all my clients. I absolutely can say that now. And I was looking at like, how do I up level? How do I get more well known? And I knew that I had a lot of great skill. And I think anybody that's in the coaching, if you are in your niche, you are here. But I didn't know how to communicate it to people. And I felt like I was his best kept secret. So at the time, I remember my background's in journalism, but I was a reporter. And I'm like, I used to get these press releases on my fax machine and on a slow news day. I would be like, okay, this is interesting. Let's, call up and do a little research on this. And so I was like, well, maybe I need PR because that would help me get out there and I would feel like an expert. I would be seen as an expert. I knew some of it was optical, but let's be real. Like sometimes, unfortunately, vanity metrics matter. I knew I was meant to impact more people than I was getting in front of. So I reached out and a couple of PR firms that I talked to, they wanted to charge me like 5,000 a month. And when you're making, and by the way, 6-month contract, and when you're making, I mean, listen, I was making good money. I was doing 150 to 200,000, but to spend $30,000 of your income for something that they cannot guarantee results, I was like, well, wait a second. I know you're telling me visibility is important, and I agree. And my background is sales and marketing. So, what is this driving towards? What are my key performance indicators? What's going to happen? And they couldn't answer that. And so I said, okay, I'm not going to spend that money. But what I did know is I wanted to be seen as an expert. And what I proceeded to do in the next year is take my background in journalism and reach out to a few friends that knew a little bit about PR and kind of piecemeal some things together. And by the end of that 12 months, dedicating about 1 hour a week towards failing forwards, I had been mentioned, featured, or interviewed in more than 20 national publications.